eyebrows. Taken as a group, they are barometers of a sea change. A new kind of toxicity seeping into and poisoning the very experience of childhood, signifying sweeping deficits in emotional competences. So we might want to ask the question, who is it that would do that? Who is it that would be so interested in robbing children of their childhood? What kind of mind or what kind of sickness in the mind would cause such an event to occur? Whether you believe in secret societies and conspiracy theories is besides the point. What kind of sickness or diseased consciousness would even continue to do such a thing or find it normal to do such a thing? A Burger King ad says, "Stop crying and start eating." This is the level of emotional rapport that Burger King is operating on. Stop crying and start eating. A pork advertisement says, "We lead you into temptation, but deliver you from evil." Please note the religious connotation there. We've spoken many times about how the religious symbolism plays into this and how after you've been raped of your inner spirit, the system, religious system, corporate system, governmental system, must give you back in surrogate, subliminally, in a second-hand way, what you're missing. Because to rob you completely of your components, your psychic and biological components, well, that's pathology. Then you're just a raving lunatic, and of course that doesn't work. The wheel won't get pushed, the money won't come in. The system needs a slave, but it needs a very dumbed-down slave. So they have to give you back what it is you're inwardly craving for. And if you can read, they're happy to tell you that's exactly what they're doing. A Haagen-Dazs advertisement says, "Maybe I'm a bit of a perfectionist, yet every time I have a Haagen-Dazs, I lose control." These advertisements are playing on the Thanatos instinct within human beings. Jean Kilbourne says that in a society in which one of two marriages ends in a divorce, we are offered constancy through our products. About 80 million Americans are clinically obese, and nearly 3 out of 4 are overweight. Indeed, in a culture seemingly obsessed with thinness and fitness, Americans are fatter than ever and fatter than people in most other cultures. 8 million Americans suffer from an eating disorder, and as many as 10% of all college-age women are bulimic. Eating disorders are the third most common chronic illness among females. And in my work, I often mention that we are not here to blame the individual who is bulimic. That individual is doing absolutely the right thing. That individual is looking for comfort. You do not become addicted unless you are missing something inside and then looking for a substitute. The drive to smoke or the drive to eat sugar is looking for sweetness in life. They're looking for, companionship, or they're looking for another very important social context. You're looking for love. You're looking for well-being. You're looking for self-esteem. That's perfectly fine. So should you. But somebody has slipped in. Some devilish Machiavellian entity has slipped in and said, it's over here. It's in this tube of toothpaste. It's in, these sandals. And it's in this bar of soap. Kilbourne says that the self-esteem of girls plummets as they reach adolescence, partly because they cannot possibly escape the message that their bodies are objects, and imperfect objects at that. Boys learn that masculinity requires a kind of ruthlessness, even brutality. Violence becomes inevitable. But that's okay. We've got a police force doubled and tripled in strength. They'll take care of it. We can build more prisons and jails and insane asylums. We have nothing to worry about. Dan Cook, the assistant professor of advertising and sociology at the University of Illinois, says that linking one's sense of self to the choices offered by the marketplace confuses personal autonomy with consumer behavior. That's right, the herd mentality. Speaking of dehumanization and desensitization, Erich Fromm, the great German sociologist and critic, says that one girl hospitalized in a state mental hospital had slashed her wrists and explained her act by saying that she wanted to see if she had any blood. One of the boys in the training school, for instance, threw rocks up on top of his garage and then let them roll down and would try to catch each rock on his head. His explanation was that this was the only way in which he could feel something. He reported that feeling the pain made him feel at least something. So today, tattooing, all kinds of fetishes, body piercing and drug taking and fighting in the streets and every other kind of thing that's going on is again born out of a natural need. We want to feel human, but we've become desensitized. We've become dehumanized. We've lost our center. So all of these vagrant and crazy subcultural things that you're seeing have an origin. They have an origin in the existential displacement and psychic impoverishment of the human race, starting with the children. Kilbourne says that our children are growing up in a toxic cultural environment, one made more toxic by advertising. No one can escape it, just as no one can escape air pollution or pesticides in our food. The world is fast becoming a global marketplace, controlled not by individual governments, but by transnational conglomerates interested only in profit. As we Americans export our economic system and our lifestyle, we also export the addictions, diseases, and psychological problems associated with it, our hazardous cultural environment. When we turn to the media in particular, we find that the work of Jordan Maxwell, the great historian and scholar, come in very handy, because he wants to elaborate and tell us in his discoveries and work that this operation, that the media, the tools that they're using, these weapons in their arsenal, are not something new, that this has been going on before historical eras. We find out, if we do a little homework, that the word media actually comes from a place. It comes from a people called the Medes. They existed in the Mediterranean area. That's where we get the word Mediterranean, mediation, meditation, and medication for. The Medes. The Medes are a group of people that lived not far from Persia. And specifically, the Medes were a cult of sorcerers, of witch doctors, of witches. And if you were a king or a potentate in those days, and you wanted to have a rival, got rid of, or you wanted something else to happen, and you couldn't use an official, overhanded way of doing that, open-handed way of doing that, you called on the Mede, you called on the Medes, and you let them take care of business, because they were the sorcerers and they understood the principles of magic, of how to get rid of your enemies for you. This is a subject you can study, and you'll find that there was a cult of people living in an area that were called on by all the powers of the world any time that any kind of sorcery needed to be done. And today, of course, we know we have the techno-shamans and the silicon sorcerers and the ivory tower witch doctors. But let us understand that they did not invent the techniques that they're using. And they're becoming more and more powerful. Right now we have 4, 5, 6 of the huge conglomerates that we've been hearing about. Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, and Disney and Viacom and Bertelsmann and Time Warner. And of course, they own many other subsidiaries. Jordan Maxwell tells us that the word Hollywood, why of all the names in the wide world would we call Hollywood, Hollywood? There's a history behind that word. The word comes from the fact that the Druids of old, the Magi of old, always used to make their wands out of the wood of the holly tree. So they didn't just pick any wand. Now, what is a wand? A wand is for putting spells on people. And Jordan Maxwell has said that the brain is like a computer. And what do you do to a computer? You program it. So programs are called programs. There's a whole act of programming going on here. And the Hollywooders, the ones who are actually putting the hex on you, the spell on you, are happy to tell you what they're doing. Now, the president of the Public Relations of America says that the stuff with which we work is the fabric of men's minds. So let there be no doubt about it, that there's a perverse form of magic going on here by people who have been doing it for thousands and thousands of years. Now, Gene Kilbourne says, some of the most talented and creative people in the world are dedicated to this work. Indeed, the most skillful propagandists of our time are not working for dictators. They're certainly not working exclusively for the Democratic Party or the Republican either. They're working for Foote, Conan, Belding, for Ogilvy and Mather, and for DDB Needham worldwide. Gene Kilbourne says that today, Time Warner, Sony, Viacom, Disney, Bertelsmann, and News Corporation together control most publishing, music, television, film, and theme park entertainment throughout the developed world. It is estimated that by the end of the millennia, these companies will own 90% of the world's information. Now, Sidney West, founder of the Fabian Society. Fabian Society goes on to become literally the Labour Party of England. And Sidney West was a member of secret societies, very powerful secret societies, subversive movements operating in England that are hiding behind the political parties of the world. He's happy to tell you, he says, to play those millions of minds, to watch them slowly respond to unseen stimulus, to guide their aspirations without their knowledge. All this, whether in high capacities or in humble, is a big and endless game of chess of ever extraordinary excitement. Now, when we come into the world, we don't come in a toxic or polluted way. We come in looking for truth, and we are of truth. We come in clear. We come in hoping that we're going to be able to be unmolested and have a clear and honest vision of the world, and that we will be told real things and be told truth by those we look up to and need in the early stages of life. But what we get is partial truth. We're conditioned. We see only what we're told to see. We're in a state of malnutrition of mind from the earliest stages. We come in pure, thinking, no, I'm not a number, I'm a free man. This is the inherent sovereign state of a human being. Freedom, the capacity to be free and live in a way that is according to one's own drives. An independent individual. We don't want to be pushed, stamped, indexed, filed, briefed, debriefed, or numbered. We want to think of our life as our own. But do we actually get that chance? We soon find that the reverse is true. One of the methodologies that is used by these silicon sorcerers is the same type of techniques that the old voodoo doctors used to use. In order to make a zombie, and actually to make one, you had to use a solution that was made from the concoction from the datura plant. There was a plant called the datura plant, and the voodoo doctor would make a concoction from that plant and then administer it to a healthy individual, and it would zombify that person. But you see, you had to continue to administer that concoction every morning, otherwise the person would regain sanity and regain consciousness. And we have exactly the same thing today, only it's called television and advertising, the new datura. We find that average person spends 6 hours a week shopping and only 40 minutes a week with their own children. As Vernon Howard so eloquently said, those who do not know what it means to be under psychic hypnosis are probably already under it. Now, Ursula Franklin, the professor emeritus of Toronto University, says that I picture the reality in which we live in terms of a military occupation. We're occupied the way the French and Norwegians were occupied by the Nazis during World War II, but this time by an army of marketeers. We have to reclaim our country from those who would occupy it on behalf of their global masters. Again, please note that language. On behalf of the global masters? That's right. The great English writer, J.K. Chesterton, says that journalism is a false picture of the world, thrown upon a lighted screen in a darkened room so that the real world is not seen and the unreal world is seen. We live under secret government, conducted by a secret process called publicity. Now, I write that nowhere in America is there a coherent medium for dealing with the psychology of the people, with repressed content and the pathology of the psyche. There are programs, newspapers, magazines, talk shows, and gossip of every description. There is interest and expenditure in sports shows, game shows, news shows, travel shows, medical and science shows, biographies, comedies, sitcoms, and other sensationalistic mass appeal shows dealing with rags to riches sagas, Hollywood superstar dramas, gutter press exposés of scandals, and so forth. Occasionally on PBS we find a self-help show occasionally, or those dealing with New Age philosophies and or religious thought. But the only public shows repeatedly viewed by the mass public, which even come close to dealing with psychological issues, repressed content, and inner existential quandaries caused by the inauthentic life, are what we might call true crime exposés, which are suggestively becoming more and more popular. What am I talking about? Well, it all goes back to Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung and the understanding of the nature of the human mind. We don't want to elaborate on the point, but a little Freud might help us to understand that as a child, when we come into this world, we of course are looking to our parents as the main authority figures in the world, those who are going to instruct us about how to make sense of this incredible theater of the external world with all its diversity and potentially threatening content. Freud said that we are, as children, caught in what is originally called the pleasure principle. Our thinking is of a very animistic state. And then as we grow, and it's different for each child, of course, we inherit what is called the reality principle, and that the parents, especially the father, although not always the father, it's usually the most masculine of the parents, is the one who introduces us to reality in a certain way. And by mimicking the parent and listening to their instruction and understanding that there's certain things we can do and certain things we can't do, we understand that there's a permissiveness that's allowed by the parents, and also there's a prohibitive quality of the parent. Well, all this taken together creates what is called our conscience, what Freud related to as the superego. Basically, our consciousness comes about. And we slowly move away from the pleasure principle in a hard way, meaning that we still want pleasure, we'll always want pleasure, but now we find that we just can't go out and rape and murder and do whatever we want to be gratified. We're going to have to find certain sublimated ways in which to attain what it is that our id, our unconscious, really wants. And of course, this transition is rather traumatic, and sometimes we can't make it. And Freud and Jung referred to that process as regression, when the strictures of reality and the impositions that reality, imposes upon us all through childhood can sometimes become too much. And so we can't handle it. We have to have what we want. So what we do is we regress psychically to a previous state within our own consciousness, a more animistic, a more basic, more primitive state. This is what happens with a lot of human beings. And in a radical way, if it happens, we can even become murderers and serial killers, and all sorts of criminal activities can start becoming the means by which we try to break through reality in other ways to get what we want. And of course, the less and less that society provides normal, healthy ways for us to get what we want, for us to expatiate our conscious, unconscious content, the more likely it is that we'll become perverse in these matters. Now, creativity and all that brings civilization comes into being by the restraints of the reality principle, which develops from the need to postpone immediate gratification. The ego censors and, if necessary, represses the forces of the id. That was just Freud's term for the unconscious mind. The general perversity of most mainstream programs in the media, which captivate the attention and imagination of millions, serves to encourage collective regression to the state of the pleasure principle, which is uncreative, uncivilized, and amoral. So I know that's a little heady, but it's very important to realize that there's a very important strategy. These people are well informed. Madison Avenue ad corporations have sometimes 50 or more paid psychologists on their staff who for every single ad will sit there in a lecture theater, and they have 50 on staff on call and many, many other ones associated with them to sit down and minute by minute, second by second, analyze an advertisement, its colors, its movement, its content, the phraseology, the memes, all of it in total, to say, no, change this, do it this way. Paid psychologists, fully cognizant about how the human behavior works in order to sell us 2 seconds of an advertisement. And on the question of repression, Dr. D.W. Winnicott says, if society is in danger, it is not because of man's aggressiveness, but because of the repression of personal aggressiveness in individuals. And J.A.C. Brown says, during 1 week in 1954 in New York television, someone was injured or threatened with violence once in every 6 minutes of program time. In the tarot cards, those who are interested in the metaphysical connotation of this, Freud's pleasure principle and the reality principle are mentioned in cards 7 and 8, with card 7 being the more austere, prohibitive type of life in which we conform and suppress our needs, our basic needs, and card 8 being the fulfillment, the healthy and fulfillment of that, and the recognition that we have certain drives and the culture-building ways in which we can go about fulfilling those drives in a non-criminalistic way, which is the art of life. But those who are behind the advertising edifice, they're not interested in the art of life. They're interested in reducing us to the primitive level. I want, I want, I want. And we'll give you whatever you want. The basic animistic limbic personality. Capitalism served fresh daily. Making associations for us that we would not normally associate. seducing us by appealing to the lower instincts, the lower drives, and to the limbic realm, to confuse and deprive us of a natural and healthy sexuality, perhaps, which the great Dr. Wilhelm Reich, who came after Freud and who knew Freud, spent his whole life trying to show us how we are distanced and disconnected from our own body and are unable to actually feel biotic pleasure. We're forced by Christianity, especially women from childhood are brought up that way, to act and dress and behave in a certain way that really represses the natural instincts. And the cultural icons that are put in front of us that we model ourselves on are all incredibly unhealthy. But then, of course, if you're doing that, we're going to find unhealthy ways to fulfill it. So we have a pornographic culture which takes care of it. But always, even in the most elementary and basic of advertisements, we're always promised something. It's very important that they get our complicity because they're promising us something. We're empty and we want somebody else to rule our lives for us. We've turned off our own thinking. So if somebody says, hey, you know, you'll be smarter, you'll be happier, you'll be sexier, that's it, that's all we need. And we're right in there. But of course, we're never told about the nightmare list that comes with that. You reach out your hand and play with the devil, and what are the results? To be disassociated, to be addicted, to be bipolar and manic depressive, suicidal no less, delinquent, utterly sociopathic and institutionalized, what the ancient people used to call possessed. If they came into our world today and saw the state we're in, they'd have no difficulty understanding that we're under the hex, that we're not in our own mind. Take just one area of the problem, obesity. Media incessantly report statistics about obesity and diet, but we almost never report about the reasons for this or other social crises which derive from alienation, addiction, and other psychological causes. That's right. From morning to night, magazines and news programs and news inserts and stories about obesity and the horrors of it, and it'll just present the problem and cut it right there. You will be lucky to get half a sentence on the causes, let alone a whole show or an entire analysis, which could do so much for the human race. Could do much to tell us, oh, so this is what causes it. Wow, I've got a handle on, you know, this now. I can take real measures. The very word consumption, to be a consumer, comes from the word consumption, which originally meant to pillage and desecrate and destroy, and also to have tuberculosis. In ancient days, if you had tuberculosis, they said that you had consumption, meaning you couldn't breathe, you were literally being strangled. Today we call it affluenza. The population of one city in the US consumes more than a country of 100 million people. 1/4 of the human race consumes 3/4 of the world's resources. Since the 50s, Americans have consumed more resources than anyone on the planet previously. Each person uses over 20 tons of raw materials annually. There are 1 billion credit cards in circulation, but fewer than 1/3 are paid off in time. In 1996, more Americans declared bankruptcy than they graduated from college. Americans spend more on driving each year than we do on health, education, or food. Although we're only 5% of the world's population, we generate 50% of the world's vehicle mileage and use 40% of the oil produced in the world. As I've said before in other programs in this series, this type of predicament, this kind of barrage and toxicity is mounting every time, every year, and it's not going to go away. We have the death of the middle class on our hands. We've got corporate powers and government apparatus that realizes that the corporations have all their power now, and there's no need to even keep the illusion of the white market. There's no reason even to have a middle class that pushes the wheel, because that had a purpose. If you follow some of the other shows that we've done, you'll see that the creation of the middle class and the conquering of America and the whole industrial revolution had a purpose. It had a set agenda. But see, now we're in the days where that agenda has been met. The corporations have all the power they need. They don't require a facade anymore. They don't need to sweet talk us anymore. So what we're dealing with here now is the death of the middle class. The ladder is being pulled up and it's sink or swim. What we're talking about here is nothing less than the abolition of man. Carl Jung says that consciousness is a very recent acquisition of nature, and it is still in an experimental state. It is frail, menaced by specific dangers, and easily injured. As anthropologists have noted, one of the most common mental derangements that occur among primitive people is what they call the loss of a soul. Now, do you think those primitive people who are suffering like that have anything like the barrage against them that we now suffer? The assault upon our consciousness, on our libido, from childhood. The first symptoms that are out of control we start seeing at puberty, where we feel completely disorientated and out of sorts. We're talking about, we have people mentioning the generation gap. That alone is a problem. But nobody ever tells you who is Generation X, what really is the generation gap and how is it caused. And they have a tremendous knowledge. As we said in the foreword of this program, there's individuals who are highly skilled, the Michelangelos and Leonardos of our age, and they study the whole nature of the connection between the mind and the world. There's a very deep study, and linguists and anthropologists know what we're talking about. In a short program like this, we haven't the time or space to do a full work on this. We can merely give an overview of some of the major problems and leave it to your own motivation and intelligence to carry on. But as Baudrillard, the philosopher, said, there's a thing in itself and there's a symbol of that thing. And it can be confusing when we lose track of which is real. Because remember, there's a mind that is perceiving. We understand from psychology that there's many levels to what we call the self. We have the outward persona behind which we hide. The persona is very important. It's the part of us that helps us interact with other people in the world and to just get what we want. Without a persona, we wouldn't be able to fit in. And persona is, in Greek, meant mask. But unfortunately, behind the persona also lies the real self. Because we're meeting somebody's representative when we meet them, we're not meeting the real self. Unfortunately, the downside of that is that we don't know who's behind that mask. And unless you have a very high intuition or highly developed psychological skills, you could be duped and fooled. The persona is a very important aspect of consciousness, but there's a downside because the person can hide their true face. Then we have the ego and all of its complexes and many deeper levels of the self. Now, the admen that I'm talking about and that Kilborn is referring to understand the dynamic interactions between the conscious and the unconscious mind. And perhaps they know even how to access these deeper strata of consciousness. We have to understand also that there's many levels of intelligence. Very slowly now, scholars are discovering that we don't just have mental intelligence. The body itself has its own form of intelligence, a cellular intelligence that keeps us alive. After all, you don't tell your own eyes to blink or your heart to beat, but it does it anyway, doesn't it? The operation of the body is a high form of intelligence. Then there's also emotional intelligence, what we call the intelligence of the heart. We always talk about the brain and the heart, but is there a brain in the heart? And a heart in the brain? Now, for generations of time, our forefathers always knew that words, symbols, colors, rhythms, light, movement, and mudras, and so on, talismans, have always been used for the spiritual uplift of mankind. One of the things that motivates me very strongly in this particular thesis, I may be talking at great length about the subversion aspects, but you see, coming from the spiritual background, a spiritual community, I'm very aware that these things were once in the keeping of the high magi, those who were dedicated to the uplift of civilization. Now we find the same tools in a different basket. You see, it's our job to take them back. Somebody has appropriated these techniques from the children of the light, and it's our duty to take them back. They were ours first of all. We allowed them to get robbed from us, and now we have to take them back. It's also important to realize, as an extension of what Freud and Jung and Reich have been saying, that we have a body, yes, and the body religiously is said to be disconnected or different from what we call the soul on a spiritual level. We have to understand, though, that there's a thing called the brain, and it's not the same as the mind. This might come as a shock to some people who think that brain and mind mean the same thing. No, it doesn't. The brain is that part of us which is the machine, the biological machine that helps us to work in the world, that paves our way, that gives us the intelligence to operate as human beings in the world. But the mind is something different, more rarefied. Basically, it is the soul. And you can program the brain But you cannot program the mind. The mind is has a different quality and a great deal more depth. Brain is mechanical. Mind is spiritual. The human brain is divided into 3 basic categories based on the levels of phylogenetic development of the species. However, the mind is hierarchical and cannot be so divided or quantified. And it's a crucial mistake to think that they're the same thing. Now, Leonard W. Doob of Yale University, he talks about propaganda. He says that propaganda is a systematic attempt by an interested individual or individuals to control the attitudes of groups of individuals through the use of suggestion and consequently to control their actions. Okay, so that's just a basic dictionary definition. J.A.C. Brown says that it comes from the word propagare, which means the gardener's practice of pinning the fresh shoots of a plant into the earth in order to produce new plants, which will later take on a life of their own. So propaganda is the taking of something and the planting of it in a soil and the cultivating of that over time. A gradual process. Daniel Goleman in Emotional Intelligence says, research has shown that in the first few milliseconds of our perceiving something, we do not only unconsciously comprehend what it is, but we decide whether we like it or not. The cognitive unconscious presents our awareness with not just the identity of what we see, but an opinion about it. Our emotions have a mind of their own, one which can hold views quite independently of our rational mind. That's right, the body, the mind, and the heart have a separate intelligence, and these ad men know when and where to talk to each one. Sometimes they know this won't work when you talk to the intellectual form of intelligence. Let's relate more to the body intelligence with this advertisement. Or no, wait, let's go for the heart on this one. But believe it here that the experts know that the unconscious is completely aware of the minutiae of advertisements and in milliseconds can receive the entire message that's being transmitted. Gene Kilborn says that only 8% of an ad's message is received by the conscious mind. The rest is worked and reworked deep within the recesses of the brain where a product's positioning and repositioning takes shape. And of course, let's not forget the subliminal aspect of this, the stuff we don't see. Subliminal perception was mentioned as a possibility by Aristotle, and the philosopher Leibniz dealt at length with the possibility of minute perceptions that are little noticed, which are not sufficiently distinguished to be perceived or remembered, but which become known through certain consequences. Leibniz said, "It is a great source of error to believe that there is no perception in the soul besides those of which it is conscious." So from the earliest times, Leibniz was writing in the 17th century, in the 1600s, and he was completely aware that the things that you see, the conscious mind only perceives the most, the minutest part. The brain is, after all, known to be an exclusionary mechanism. What would happen if we were able to see all and hear all that was around us? So the ad men make use of that fact, and they want to bypass the normal drives and the normal sensor and communicate to our unconscious mind, which is about 99-point-something% of our waking consciousness. But it's behind the veil of ego consciousness. Yes, it's old techniques, but with new names. The techniques that are being used from the ivory towers today are known by different names, like telehypnosis and meta-contrast, hemisync, synesthesia, and embedding. But they're old names, they're new names for very old mind-controlled techniques. And what's the consequence? What comes out of it all? Well, groupthink, subservience, endless dialectical divisions, fashionable allegiances, which of course change when the fashion changes, implanted associations, escapism, that's like fantasy into reality, inflated personas, and excessive eroticization. Let's just take one of those, the endless dialectics. Has anyone ever noticed that if you have Levi's, you have to have Jordache? If there's a Coke, there will be a Pepsi. There's always the rivalry going on, and that rivalry is found everywhere. But it's by design, East versus West, Russia via the USA. You can't have Letterman, but on the other channel is Leno. If you're going to have rockers, you've got to have mods. If you have gay, you have to have straight. We're living in a world of dualism. Dualism is a healthy thing, but when it's designed, put in front of us, so we're thinking in terms of allegiances. Our allegiances are being made for us. You know, there's really no difference between the two cigarettes, Camel and Marlboro, but oh, there's a big difference to you from a point of view of identification. Among some of the techniques frequently used by advertisers is the substitution of names. Instead of communists, we'll have slang names like Reds, Union bosses. We have the Huns in the First World War. Instead of saying Germans, you use the denigrating word Hun, or Yids for Jews. And instead of just drinking or consuming something, we're going to enjoy it. The advertisers are already telling us we're enjoying it before we've even enjoyed it. Another technique is selection, the deliberate selection of the points, the information and the content, which the corporate spin doctors and admins prefer, and the avoidance or elimination of that which they do not. Then we have blatant, all-out lying, concocting lies, posing as truths, and misrepresenting the words or true opinions of other people. Of course, we know we have repetition, mantra-like endless repetition of the meme, the slogan, the jingo, which ensure that it is insinuated by unthinking participators, keeping the world safe for democracy, the axis of evil, the one world or the new world order, repeated over and over again. Doesn't matter if we understand what they mean. That's not important. But we have to be able to have them instilled in our minds. Finally, the meaning will be coming later on. There's assertions that are involved, asserting things as true or actual without actual proof, without recourse to contradictory viewpoints or voices. People agree, for instance, that Zesta is the best. Okay, people agree. Have we been able to go out there and talk to them individually? No, we just accept it. Because the authority figure told us. Creation of the enemy. We saw in other programs in this series how that works on a political level. The great nemesis that makes everyone feel safe, grateful, and conformist. The enemy must be an ism. We reduce the enemy, i.e. a fascist, a communist, or as liberalism. It's some ism or some ology or some ist. Some cover-all statement. There's an appeal to authority which is so successful, such as my doctor says, the experts agree, which insinuates that all the work is done, we have the absolute truth. One that is good for ourselves and therefore good for everyone. And then, of course, allegiance, loyalty, identification. The best brand image is the self-image, which enables the customer to project himself into the product so that what he actually buys is a projection of his own traits. Then there's the reward mechanism, very important. We treat ourselves for hard work and self-admiration, a basic drive of all normal mammals and humans. And that is also manipulated. J.A.C. Brown says that most ad men would claim that there is a genuine science of advertising psychology, comparable, for example, with industrial psychology. The first textbooks on the subject to arrive in Britain was written by Professor Walter Dill Scott, director of the Psychological Laboratory at the Northwestern University in Chicago. This appeared in 1909. It was not until the late 1930s that advertising discovered Freud, and little came of this discovery until the late 40s and early 50s. Erich Fromm says that in the cybernetic age, the individual becomes increasingly subject to manipulation. His work, his consumption, and his leisure are manipulated by advertisers, by ideologies, by what B.F. Skinner, the behavioral psychologist, calls positive reinforcements. The individual loses his active, responsible role in the social process. He becomes completely adjusted and learns that any behavior, act, thought, or feeling which does not fit into the general scheme puts him at a severe disadvantage. In fact, he is what he is supposed to be. What has happened in modern industrial society is that traditions and common values and genuine social personal ties with others have largely disappeared. The modern mass man is isolated and lonely even though he is part of a crowd. He has no convictions which he could share with others, only slogans and ideologies he gets from the communications media. Now, Erich Fromm says that Emil Durkheim, the great sociologist, called this phenomena anomie, and found that it was the main cause of suicide, which had been increasing with the growth of industrialization. He referred by anomie to the destruction of all traditional social bonds due to the fact that all truly collective organization had become secondary to the state and that all genuine social life had been annihilated. He believed that people living in the modern political state are a disorganized dust of individuals. Now, the idea of the ad men is to get us to objectify humans and personalize products. One of the ways that this is achieved is by creating allegiances and loyalties to various products. This is one of the main reasons why habits and addictions are hard to break. We may say it, but we don't really mean it when we say that a man is addicted to alcohol or to tobacco. What we really mean is that he's addicted to a particular brand of alcohol or tobacco. The man has transferred his loyalty to a brand, a loyalty that once should have been given to a human agency. And we do not like to be thought of as disloyal, do we? So the subliminally embedded message makes us believe that if we break an addiction, we are betraying a friend. Advertising corrupts relationships and then offers us products, says Jane Kilbourne, both as solace and as substitutes for the intimate human connection we all long for and need. Most of us know by now that advertising often turns people into objects. Women's bodies and men's bodies too these days are dismembered, packaged, and used to sell everything from chainsaws to chewing gum. And that's right, we don't want to break our allegiances because we are subliminally thinking that that's to betray a friend. But when you realize that it's quite the reverse, then you can handle it, then you can do it. Because you're not breaking an allegiance to a friend, you're breaking an allegiance to a deadly enemy. That alone should make it easier. In an ad for Eastpak, the ad shows a guy on a date with a beautiful woman with his backpack on the back of his chair. The ad says, "Who says guys are afraid of commitment? He's had the same backpack for years." That's right, the woman's not important, but the backpack certainly is. "That truck saved my life," says another ad. And an ad says, "Touching is good. Only thing is, it's not for a human being, it's for some technical gadget that's being fawned over." In an ad for sneakers, the caption is, "When was the last time you felt this comfortable in a relationship? Not with a human, but with your sneakers." "At least we can be faithful to our watches," says a watch advertisement. Another Eastpak ad says, the meme says, "Comes with a lifetime guarantee not to rip, tear, break, or ask for a ring." "It's not a family car, it's family," says a car advertisement. And in 17 magazine, there's an ad that says, "It's more than a magazine, it's her life." A Toyota advertisement says, "Makes a better impression than your last date." So again, the whole idea is that humans are fallible, humans are stressful, your relationships with them are problematic, but don't worry, we're going to give you all that harmony, all that certainty, all that comfort and security from a product, from a car, from a metal object, or from a ring. "Ready for a new relationship?" says a Burger King advertisement. "Hang on to your spirit," is a Southern Comfort advertisement. "Diamonds, a girl's best friend." And an MTV ad says, "Buy this 24-year-old and get his friends absolutely free." Now, Lewis H. Laplin, in Money and Class in America, says that no matter how effusive and our rhetoric to the contrary, most Americans cannot bring themselves to trust the unaffiliated individual. We prefer to repose our confidence in institutions, a brand name or a corporation, a bank. It's the figure of Babbitt or Cyrus Vance, not Clint Eastwood, who represents a triumph of the American dream. The man who goes along to get along, who knows the right people and belongs to the right clubs, whose every opinion seconds the nomination of the chairman, who submits easily and with a winning smile to what de Tocqueville called the tyranny of the masses. How many times have you seen us applauding for a product as if it's a human being? You mentioned Coca-Cola and everybody claps. Some statistics are recited and we all stand up and applaud and genuflect over a product. Not even, what are we thinking? But we're all thinking, this doesn't affect me, I'm normal, right? Well, turns out that extroverts are the easiest people to hypnotize. Right, because those who've got an internal life. It's what I've been saying a lot in this series. Those who are endowed with an interior life, who are what the philosopher and psychologist Arno Gruen said was inner directed. They're actually the most difficult people to hypnotize. And yet in society, should we meet such an introverted person, oh, they're strange, they're weird, can't get a handle on them. And we, in this world, very much reinforce the extrovert drives. And yet we find that hypnotists know that these are the most suggestible of all creatures walking the planet. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't be extrovert. Extroversion is very important, but realize that there's limitations to each particular modality of thought. What we're talking about here is balance. And you can only come to balance when we realize what forces are impinging and imposing and preventing us from coming to that kind of equilibrium and that status. J.A.C. Brown says that because some neurosis makes people incompetent at work, we are liable to assume that those without a neurosis would be competent, whereas the truth is that only the incompetent neurotic who is seen by the psychiatrist, and since neurosis is socially defined, we ignore the great bulk of brilliant people who are successful precisely because they are neurotic. Kilborn says that it seems ridiculous to many people to give so much weight to advertising. Most people feel that advertising is fun, sexy, often silly, but certainly not anything to take seriously. Almost everyone holds the misguided belief that advertisements don't affect them, don't shape their attitudes, don't help define their dreams. What I hear more than anything else is, I don't pay attention to ads, I just tune them out. They have no effect on me. Of course, I hear this most often from young people wearing Budweiser caps. In truth, we are all influenced by advertising. There is no way to tune out this much information, especially when it is carefully designed to break through the tuning out process. And how right she is. But what I advocate is that you can tune it out, you can block it out, but you can only do that by creatively doing that. You can only do that by knowing it, becoming fully conversant with the way that it works. Then you're really armored up. In Advertising Age magazine, we read, "A strange world it is, in which people spending millions on advertising must do their best to prove that advertising doesn't do very much." Well, Nazi Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels would agree. He said, "This is the secret of propaganda. Those who are to be persuaded by it should be completely immersed in the ideas of the propaganda without ever noticing that they're being immersed in it." Ever heard the story of the frog that is boiled and doesn't know it because the heat is turned up so gradually? Incrementalism. Kilborn says that in the 1999 Super Bowl, a Victoria's Secret ad paraded bra and panty-clad models across a TV screens for more than 30 seconds. 1 million people turned away from the game to log on to the website promoted in the ad. Of course, it doesn't affect anybody. Advertisements say, pleasure to burn. If it feels good, just do it. The energy you crave. Again, always appealing to the death instinct in you, knowing that you're sorely repressed, screaming for vengeance, screaming for justice, screaming to have your way. The pleasure principle doesn't like to be inhibited. And we have to take orders from everyone around us. We have to live in cubes and boxes our whole life. We can hardly form a sentence without being interrupted by other people. How rare it is to even be able to fully, express what we think, and how rare it is to ever express what we feel. And you think the unconscious mind sits okay with all of that? Of course not. It's going to desperately find ways to exercise all of its frustrations in the way that the great psychologists have said it would. Today we hear about nothing but makeovers, 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 implying that we're not good enough as we are. We find that there's impotency medication advertised during James Bond marathons. Viagra and other sex potency drugs advertised near the period of Valentine's Day. On Sundays when we should be resting and decompressing, we got nothing but sports and war films to keep the energy up, the libido up. Never for a moment should we ever be given pause. And all night long, in the time when your unconscious mind is more dominant, you've got exercise machine infomercials, which are nothing but pornography and under a different name. Advertising, says Bernard McGrave, PhD, is designed to generate an inner sense of conflict with the self. Advertisements say, I'm beginning to get on my nerves. My doctor diagnosed me with heartburn, but I also worry about the other medicine that I was taking, which is not compatible with what he prescribed. Those are typical of various advertising memes that you'll see on television. The whole cult of anxiety. Gene Kilborn says a cigarette provides a symbol of independence. A pair of designer jeans or sneakers conveys status. The right perfume or beer resolves doubts about femininity or masculinity. And Joel Bakan, referring to the work of the great Freudian Melanie Klein, the work of Klein with children seems to show that from an extremely early stage of development, two emotions arise which have the greatest possible relevance to our later responses to social stimuli and remain very persistent throughout life. These are anxiety and guilt, upon both of which propagandists constantly play. The media networks, the television, theater, really creates for us what might be described as a new arena. In the time of the Romans, for instance, when you wanted to help people process all their inner corruption, sadism, and violence, you just took them down to the local arena and watched them be torn apart by animals or hacked to pieces in gladiatorial spectacles of gore and blood. We have very much the same thing going on through the television. We find that 70% of young adults have a television. 97% of homes have one. The average child watches over 3,000 ads per day. And by the age 20, an average person views over 1 million commercials a year. A viewer witnesses 5 acts of violence per hour during prime time. And ads take up over 2/3 of newspaper space and 40% of the mail. Almost half the newspapers in the world are published in the United States and Canada. A person could spend 3 years of their life watching TV. Channel 1, these ads on Channel 1 cost approximately $200,000 for a captive audience of school kids. And that's right. We now don't turn to the human being to have a decent, healthy, realistic conversation. We want the talking heads to tell us all about it. And of course, they're happy to do that. But the way that we're given information through the media, the ubiquitous oracles of the media, the television, is always in this pseudo-democratic, egalitarian way. We'll have the pro and we'll have the con, just as we saw earlier on. We're never going to have an actual individual stand up and take courage and say, here's what we believe. We're going to have this fake dualism. I'm right, you're right, they're right, he's right, she's right. And of course, we always have the illusion that there's a host who's an arbitrator, who's the objective party. But of course, what their job is to do is to subtly steer your particular allegiance. And they do this in a variety of ways. You think it's all objective and you're just hearing the facts. Please realize that a lot of this is all doctored. And this I'm right, you're right, they're right philosophy, it nullifies absolute truth. We no longer want to listen to our own inner innate truth because we're bombarded with so much relative truth. And finally, when those two things start to come together, when we're just bombarded enough and the needle hits red, this dialectic continues, the critical mass is reached, and we have no opinions about anything. Finally, it's just like, let go, pop, bang, and we can't make up our own mind anymore. We abdicate our intelligence, our reason. There's too many philosophies, there's too many nuances. My own truth doesn't matter. And again, who comes in to replace it? The television people's champions, who will be happy to replace your own natural intelligence. But the whole problem with that is that we're not being taught we're not being told how to think. It's all about what to think. And there's a big, big difference. If you say this is the letter A, okay, this is the letter A, and somebody tells you this is the letter Y, then we take it to be that's the letter Y. But we are never allowed to ask, why is A, and why is Y? See, that's critical intelligence. So what to think and how to think are two very different things, and our culture is overwhelmingly orientated towards the what to think. We saw in the program Divination and the Goddess Tradition this conflict between the doing and the being. And through this advertisement barrage, we are being pushed into a verb. We're being pushed into this whole concept of the doing, overwhelmingly so. We're being focused on the lifestyle and not life. And into the what to think rather than the how. Now, a little earlier we mentioned the fact that, of course, nobody in the advertising business directly is going to admit to any of this. Those who work within the symbolic modes of communication will happily tell you that rock video couldn't possibly arouse any such criminalistic or sexually deviant urges within you. And this particular advertisement is just a joke, it's just fun. You have a lot of intelligence, you can turn over, it has no effect. And we talked about how that's a complete and utter fallacy. But we want to also back that up. How exactly do they manipulate context and manipulate words to arrive at the result that they want? They're happy to tell us, hey, you're the guy making all the connections. Hey, if we put this bikini clad model over here, and we put this phallic beer bottle dripping with ice and water over here, there's nothing sexual about that. Your perverted mind, viewer, is the one making the association. It's really got nothing to do with us. Now, of course, that's a very obvious example I'm giving you, but there are many. I mean, you don't need to study Sergei Eisenstein and the complexities of editing and montage to understand that there are very, very subtle illusions that can be made, and juxtapositions and false allegiances that can be created. And yes, they're right, we are creating it with our minds. But are they off the hook? Can they say, oh, it's all your mind, it's all your own sordid urges that are doing it? Take this word, which is not a word, just 4 letters, MGNM. What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything until you look at the vowels. M-A and U. But you see, what actually happened there, when you looked at the original one, was that you already put those vowels in your mind. I put 4 letters in front of you, but you knew what it said, because your mind added the A and the U to magnum. So our mind adds the association. And this simple little demonstration, there are so many demonstrations of this, but this simple demonstration shows you how it's done, by applied associations. And this is one of the ways that they cop out and say, hey, we've done nothing. It's all in your own head. Throughout the media, we find the perfect family. Of course, the perfect family is more or less based on a masculinistic, patriarchal model. In certain shows, we even see the total absence of the feminine principle altogether. But it's very important to realize that this so-called model family that's painted in perfect colors and perfect lucidity to us on the media is very far from perfect, something that is not really a true model of life. But it works. Lots of people, like an individual, will pick a certain archetype through a stereotype. We are not being introduced at all in this world to our archetypal family within. We're being given external stereotypes instead, and we confuse the two. And then now, as time passes, these family units are still there, but perhaps they're a little darker, a little bit more subversive. Because, of course, the mental toxicity is getting a lot worse in our world. And as it gets worse, we're going to need different kinds of models. So the family unit is becoming a little more sinister, a little bit more dark, in order to represent what's going on inside. Kilborn says that today we export a popular culture that promotes escapism, consumerism, violence, and greed. We end up in a world ruled by, in John Maynard Keynes' phrase, the values of the casino. On this deeper level, rampant commercialism undermines our physical and psychological health, our environment, and our civic life, and creates a toxic society. Advertising corrupts us and promotes a dissociative state that exploits trauma and can lead to addiction. To add insult to injury, it then co-opts our attempts at resistance and rebellion. That's right, it appeals to the death instinct also, and to these more unhealthy drives, because it understands that we're going to rebel. See, it's got the finger on the pulse. And remember, it's the prime perpetrator. So the perpetrator is very clever. It knows exactly what it's robbing and raping us of, and then gets ready for the moment of reaction. And then it's ready and waiting again with a new set of bromides and a new set of plausible avenues to experience. Doesn't matter as long as the cash goes into the right pockets. Nietzsche said of the human being, man is the creature who must constantly overcome himself in order to live fully. That's right, he can't just eat and sleep. He has to develop. He knows that there's a calling. He grows. He feels a sense of destiny. He feels passion to change things in his life. He has to overcome his own lower nature, all perfectly normal human traits. He wants to develop and get a deeper sense of life and not just be a controlled and narcissistic zombie. But unfortunately, the media know that. The power behind these corporations understand this and offer us a myriad surrogate and implausible and fake ways to do it. So that instead of going towards the truth, we go on a much windier and deviant road. Who's leading who? We say the blind lead the blind, but are those leading us really the blind? In a Room 2 ad, the ad goes, "What the bitch who's about to steal your man wears." So now the protagonist that's being spoken to in this ad must rush out and buy what the bitch who's about to steal her man is wearing so that she can compete. That's a really healthy remedy to the problem. But this whole build-up of venom and violence, there's so many programs today. I'm not speaking about individual programs in particular. I'm just talking about the milieu. Whether these programs have a certain local good, street level good, is a whole other debate. But the fact of their existence is a way to expatiate the phallic principle and also the drive for vengeance and justice that we're actually denied in the world. You see, in olden days, it wasn't quite the same way. In previous ages, you pretty much could take justice into your own hands. And whether that's right or wrong, again, is a very separate question. But the fact is, you could do it in previous days. In the modern age, you cannot. Now, if you turn something like that off in relatively recent historical times, that's going to matter to the human consciousness. That's going to build up a lot of inner repression. So how do you vacate it? You can't have everybody running amok. So you use the ubiquitous media oracle by putting on televisions that show constant violence and bloodshed and corpses and forensics and whatnot. It helps to exercise a lot of this repression. The fascination with death and corpses and crime. Astrologers are telling us that the planet Pluto, which rules the underworld and the underworld process and the dark side of the human consciousness, the underside of human nature, and some of the more limbic basic drives, is going to be soon coming into prominent position in the sky. Don't want to get into all the astrology in this program, but this planet Pluto is going to be dominant in the heavens in a very few years, which means that there's going to be more need for the processing of this darker content. Ergo, Madison Avenue and the Hollywood and the corporations know this. So that's why we're having more of these forensic programs and involving corpses and dead bodies and mortuaries and morgues. Pick up an astrology book and understand that the sign of Scorpio and the planet Pluto have a lot to do with that, the secrets of life and the secrets of death in a biological concept, investigating the secrets of power and sexuality and the hidden side of consciousness. So all of this is on the celestial clock. And so we have the question of justice, a perfectly normal human drive, but we have it in a repressed way. And of course, America, as we know, is fixated with the concept of law and court dramas. From Perry Mason to Kramer versus Kramer to Kill a Mockingbird. Just think in your mind's eye how many cops and robbers and good cop, bad cop and courtroom dramas there are on television. There's thousands of them. The list is almost unlimited because there's this preoccupation with this particular facet of human nature, the concept of justice and courts and right and wrong. The idea being that if you're not getting justice in your own life, that's okay, you can watch it on TV. So now we've looked at what's being done. Now we need to go into greater depth to look at who's doing what to whom. We've spoken in other programs in this series about the occult history of the world and the occult history of America. Let's take a little moment to look at exactly how that plays in the context of this particular thesis. Talking of the establishment, Arthur S. Miller from George Washington University, the law professor there, he says that those who formally rule take their signals and commands not from the electorate as a body, but from a small group of men plus a few women. This group will be called the establishment. It exists even though that existence is stoutly denied. It is one of the secrets of the American social order. A second secret is the fact that the existence of the establishment, the ruling class, is not supposed to be discussed. On the American $1 bill, you see an old symbol, the pyramid, with 13 layers, with a detached pyramidon at the top, with an eye, the all-seeing eye. This symbol is the symbol of a super secret society coming out of Bavaria, Germany, called the Illuminati. It's just one of the many powerful secret societies operating in the world, but in an American context, it's very important because it infiltrated Freemasonry and is now dominant in the world. And many of the corporations and organizations that I'm talking about have take their orders from these secret societies. And we know this primarily through the study of symbolism. Now, the leader of the Illuminati in the 1700s was Adam Weishaupt. His picture is on the left. When he died, he passed the mantle on to Giuseppe Mazzini, the famous Italian revolutionary, who then passed it on to the American Albert Pike, who was very active in the Civil War in this country. He was the creator of the Ku Klux Klan also, and he was the bringer of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, that system, to America. The Illuminati was officially founded on May 1st, 1776, which is, of course, very close to America's official birthday of July 4th, 1776. The Illuminati have been involved in fomenting many wars and revolutions throughout the world. As Alois Hoffmann, the editor of the Journal de Vienna, said, "I shall never cease to repeat that the French Revolution has come from Masonry and that it was made by the writers and the Illuminati." And the Illuminati and these secret societies are very adept at the use of symbolism in order to communicate to their members and to the world. If you take that dollar bill, for instance, in the pyramid that I was just talking about, and you inscribe a six-pointed star around that pyramid, you'll find that the points of the triangle touch letters. And if you write those letters out, you'll find that it says Mason, M-A-S-O-N. And is that not what the Masons were? The builders of the pyramid, the Freemasons, the keepers of the guilds, and the mystery of temple building and city design and so on. So we might ask, what is a Masonic symbol, a symbol of the Freemasons, doing on the $1 bill of America? Well, if you go back to the 1700s and look at the original Illuminati documents that Adam Weishaupt, this is a known secret society that has a birthday, those documents have that exact same symbol on the front of them. Symbols are telling us something. But again, it's hidden in plain sight. On the same dollar bill, just as a case in point, we are inundated with symbolism. We have the Star of David above the eagle's head with 13 stars. We have 32 feathers in one wing and 33 feathers in another, representing the unison of the 32nd and 33rd degree of Freemasonry. The eagle holds olive branches, which of course is from the Semitic line of ancient times. And the arrows, that symbol of the eagle with the olive branches and the arrows actually comes from the Semitic tribe of Manasseh, or Manasseh. That's one of the 12 tribes of Israel. That's why there's a Star of David over its head. It also comes from the House of Rothschild from the 14th century in Frankfurt, Germany, the banking cartel, the power dynasty. Lord Rothschild, his eagle had 5 arrows originally for his 5 sons that would be sent into all the countries of the world to open banks there. And as history books prove, it was this dynasty that fomented the wars between the European powers, all funded by the same single family, the banking dynasty, the Rothschilds, who are operating in America through a variety of fronts. The occultist A.E. Waite, a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, said that beneath the broad tide of human history there flow the stealthy undercurrents of the secret societies, which frequently determine in the depths the changes that take place on the surface. Benjamin Disraeli, who spent his whole life uncovering secret societies and warning the world, he was the first Jewish Prime Minister of England. He said of this, "The government of this country has not only to deal with governments, kings and ministers, but also with secret societies, elements which must be taken into account, which at the last moment can bring our plans to nothing, which have agents everywhere, who incite assassinations and can, if necessary, lead a massacre." And Albert Pike himself, talking about the means by which the control of the secret societies is exercised, in his letter to Giuseppe Mazzini in 1871, he says, "We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror will clearly show to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and the most bloody turmoil. Then, everywhere, the citizenry, obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries, will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity, anxious for an ideal, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer. So these Luciferians are literally telling you that they are at the helm and that they have a policy, a concept, an order out of chaos. Under the pyramid of the Illuminati, it says the Novus Ordo Seclorum, the New World Order. And above it, it's presenting this. Here we present for you, by way of our machinations, a new world order. They have an operating manual, and it's known in their own terms as Ordo ab Chaos, order out of chaos, to create so much foment and upheaval in the world and chaos politically, socially, and economically, that then their agenda will move forward. And in this series, we've explored several of the ways in which this is done. Giuseppe Mazzini, in his own words, talks about the hierarchy. He says, "We form an association of brothers in all points of the globe, yet there is one unseen that can hardly be felt, yet it weighs on us. Whence comes it? Where is it? No one knows, or at least no one tells. This association is secret, even to us, the veterans of the secret societies." So here's the head of the Illuminati himself saying, hey, there's a power even above us. Well, of course there is. In all pyramidical structures, in all hierarchies, there's higher puppet masters. You think it goes for the secret societies? And then we doubt that the corporations operate in the same way? Albert Pike said again, emphasizing their beliefs, in addition to the letter he wrote to Mazzini in 1871, another he wrote to the heads of his Palladian councils on July 14th, 1889, happened to fall into the hands other than intended. It was written to explain the Luciferian dogma concerning worship of Satan and worship of Lucifer. In it, he said in part, "That which we say to the crowd is we worship God. The religion should be, by all us initiates of the higher degrees, maintained in the purity of the Lucifer doctrine. Yes, Lucifer is God." Now these are not some cult cranks or some little society, little nickel and dime society that is operating in some broken down house in the center of the city or in a suburb somewhere. This isn't some hocus pocus. These are the leaders of the most powerful secret societies in the world. If you're coming to this for the first time, please make use of the other programs in this series where we do a more thorough introduction and elaboration on these secret societies and how they impact the world of the modern times. Now, one of the men approached long ago by the Illuminati who exposed them was John Robertson. He wrote a book called Proofs of a Conspiracy, which dates from 1798. He was a professor in the university who was approached by agents of the Illuminati trying to get him to join. And soon he discovered who and what these people were all about. And he exposed them in this incredible book. And he quotes Weishaupt, who says, "The great strength of our order lies in its concealment. Let it never appear in any place in its own name, but always covered by another name and another occupation. None is fitter than the 3 lower degrees of Freemasonry. The public is accustomed to it, expects little from it, and therefore takes little notice of it." Just like Freemasonry, which it infiltrated, it has levels of initiation. And at each level, the individual is only given partial knowledge. He says, "These good folk swell our numbers and fill our money box. Set yourselves to work. These gentlemen must be made to nibble at the bait. But this sort of people must always be made to believe that the grade they have reached is the last." It's the same system that works in the schools and colleges of the world. Yes, you know something, but you're mostly in ignorance. 3/4 of everything in this world is shrouded in ignorance. Nobody is given to understand in completion because, first of all, we're not using our whole brain, and secondly, we've got a campaign that dumbs us down and keeps us sequestered. Remember, we're not being taught how to think. We're being taught what to think. Now, the Duke of Brunswick, the Grand Master of World Freemasonry in the 1700s, understood that a secret society of great power and also great techniques was infiltrating his order. And he stood up, like many original Freemasons in this country in America stood up and said, we have to disband the whole of Freemasonry. I mean, this thing that's thousands of years old, we're going to have to disband it completely because it's been infected. Unfortunately, that did not happen. In his own words, the Duke of Brunswick says, "I have been convinced that we as an order have come under the power of some very evil occult order, profoundly versed in science, both occult and otherwise. Though not infallible, their methods being black magic, That is to say, electromagnetic power, hypnotism, and powerful suggestion. We are convinced that this order is being controlled by some sun order, after the nature of the Illuminati, if not by that order itself. So it's okay for the Duke of Brunswick, the head of Freemasonry, to tell you that there's secret societies operating in the world, that they're using black magic, and then for him to even underscore that and delineate and tell you, no, this is electromagnetic, hypnotic, suggestion, the very powers we've been talking about in this program. But if somebody on the street was to tell you this, you'd look at them as if they were a crank. That is part of the problem. That's part of the manipulation. Now, General J.F.C. Fuller, a war historian, he wrote, "The government of the Western nations, whether monarchical or republican, has passed into the invisible hands of a plutocracy, international in power and grasp. It was, I venture to suggest, this semi-occult power which pushed the mass of the American people into the cauldron of World War I." Woodrow Wilson, just before his death, in his book, The New Freedom, had finally the guts to stand up and talk to them. He was a 33rd degree Freemason, but after a life of criminality and mass murder, he decided to expose it. He said, "Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of somebody or afraid of something. They know there's a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they'd better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it." As you can see from my work and these series of shows, we decided not to take his advice. We are going to speak up above our breath about it because the whole of the human race needs to know about the machinations of these organizations and what they're up to. And George Washington, Freemason, who also understood what was happening, he said, "I have heard much of the nefarious and dangerous plan of the Illuminati. It was not my intention to doubt that the doctrines of the Illuminati and principles of Jacobinism is a term in Europe for the Illuminati, had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one was more truly satisfied of this fact than I am." Now, there are many books on this by fine writers like John Coleman and Fritz Springmeier and Stephen Knight. Many books and tomes. I urge you, if you will, to visit my own website, the links page there. We have all the resources you could possibly want, because I insist that you do not take what I'm saying at face value. Do not just believe what you're being told in this world. Do the research, do the homework, take hold of this, discover it, find out. All the sources are there provided for you in this series, and also you can contact me personally if you want a list of books or more information on this intriguing subject. One of the sources is no other than Professor Carroll Quigley, who is considered and was the guru of Bill Clinton, the man that Bill Clinton said affected him more than any other man. Well, Professor Carroll Quigley says there does exist and has existed for a generation an international Anglophile network which operates to some extent in the way the radical right believes the communists act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as the round table groups, has no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other groups, and frequently does so. I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or most of its aims, and have for much of my life been close to it and many of its instruments. But since we're talking about symbolism here, we want to underscore that again. Here is the statue of George Washington in Washington, and the strange pose of the president sitting and stripped to the waist and in his arms in this strange position. Well, Freemasons and Knights Templar know exactly what that pose is all about. Their god Baphomet. This is an emblem of secret societies with a goat's head and the same pose. That's where that comes from. In tarot, if you take a tarot deck and lift the fourth card you'll find is called the Emperor. Card number 4 of the tarot is called the Emperor. Shows a stern countenance male figure, the Emperor, sitting in a great marble throne. Well, what do you see when you go to the Lincoln Memorial? Is the stern-countenanced male patriarch, the founding father, the Emperor of America, sitting in the great marble throne. These symbols come from somewhere. We saw that the Illuminati pyramid is the prime symbol of the secret societies here at the G7 summit, with the leaders of the world, Francois Mitterrand on the right, Bill Clinton in the middle, and Tony Blair, a bunch of other criminals. And they're sitting around a table, and of course you can see in the center the triangle and the striations of light coming out of it. That's a secret society symbol. And we know even that the round table groups are a very powerful secret society in England, formed by Cecil Rhodes. They're called the Round Table Group, and they control most of the American think tanks and foundations. Though they, on paper, appear to be of different parties, the idea is, and of course as they're happy to tell you by the symbolism that they use, they're one party. And that's why it is extremely important to realize that when we, as normal human beings, caring about humanity and caring about what happens in our neighborhoods, want positive change to take place, and why it never really does, is because, you see, what's the point of going to a criminal syndicate and then saying, criminal A, we're going to vote for you, could you please undo what your syndicate and the rest of the members are doing? Because we don't like criminal B anymore. So we run over here to John Kerry, and go, we'll vote for you. Oh, of course, we couldn't even manage that. But anyway, we'll vote for you if you can undo what this other criminal is doing in the world. But what's the point of that? They both belong to the same secret societies. They both have blood ties, direct blood ties to the same royal dynasties of Europe. So when nothing gets done, please understand there's a reason for that. And coming to this for the first time, just pay attention to the symbolism. The symbolism is very, very important. Here's another statue of George Washington in Washington, D.C., and the plinth. The sculptors have put the bust, and then they put the plinth, and under it says George Washington. And then it says Freemason and First President. And underneath you can see the Masonic compass and rule and the letter G. Freemason and First President, what it says. But of course one would take exception to this. How come the word Freemason is coming before First President? This is a public statue. This is a public man. He was the President of the United States. But the allegiance hierarchy is being told to you. Now, that raises a question. If these individuals have allegiances behind the scenes to secret societies, how can we trust a lot of their so-called allegiances and oaths of office? I mean, if I'm making a promise to you, but I've got my hands, my fingers crossed behind my back, how good is that promise? Maybe that would account for some of the strange historical quirks that have gone on, and how we seem to be going backwards instead of forwards. But again, they're happy to tell you, if only you know how to read. And what of these allegiances? Well, we find when we make a study of Freemasonry that they have oaths that preclude their oaths to other office. For instance, in the Duncan's ritual, the Royal Archmasons say, I will aid and assist a companion Royal Archmason when engaged in any difficulty and espouse his cause, whether it be right or wrong. A companion Royal Archmason secrets shall remain as secure and inviolable in my breast as in his own. Murder and treason not accepted. So does that not account for the fact that these people are some of the worst criminals in the world? Well, of course, if you're given carte blanche like that, aren't you more likely to even commit crimes when you know that there's nobody to bring you to justice? But the very fact that that should be said, that murder and treason not accepted, is horrendous, that we should have such organizations in our midst. The famous handshake, most people who've even made a brief study of Freemasonry know that the handshake is a very prominent means of identification. But what we're probably not aware of is how much the corporate world use that very same Masonic symbol. So watch out when you see an advertisement with a handshake. Just realize it may not be an accident, because the handshake and many other symbols come out of the secret societies that we may not first be aware of, like the letter G, for instance, in the G7 summit. Now, the Freemasons, to become a Freemason, you move through what is called the 3 degrees, or the third degree. That's why they say that you're given the 3rd degree when you're picked up by the police and taken downtown. And the idea also that most police stations are underground. The idea that you're taken below is an old theme from Egypt, where the forces of darkness take you below into the underworld for processing. But the 3rd degree is a term in Freemasonry. And we find that the number 3 is sacred to all Freemasons, and this is the reason why it has been incorporated into so many areas of religious and secular life. We saw that the triangle of the Freemasons, the Illuminati, is a 3. And the portal of the temple of Freemasons is the threshold. But we have three divisions of society: nobility, clergy, and the serfs, the servants in ancient society. Nobility, clergy, and the serfs made up the old medieval feudal divisions of society. Now we have the three divisions of the economic world: first, second, third world. Well, I didn't call it that. You didn't make up that term. Who would normally think of the world being divided into three sections of first, second, and third? Where do these terms come from? Who is the Trilateral Commission? We have three main political parties always put before us: Labour, Conservative, and Liberal, or Democrat, Republican, and Independent. We have three levels of the social classes: upper, middle, and lower. When's the last time you thought of yourself as a middle class person, or an upper class person, or a lower class person? These are sociological terms nobody invents. We would not normally think of ourselves in that way, but somebody has divided us into those categories and subcategories. In sports, we find that there's three levels of competence, distinguished by the bronze, silver, and gold. We have three presidential debates. We have three levels of matriculation: bachelor's, master's, professorship. Three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. Three branches of the legislature: the upper house and the lower house. We have the armed forces, three levels in the beginning: the private, corporal, and sergeant, and the three stripes. In the courts, we have the minor, the state, and the federal. We have to realize that all cults, all organizations, all churches, all governments, and all royal families are distinguished by the symbols that they use.